Well, that was Solar Power by Lord, and we hope that gives you a bit of a teaser as to what to expect for the session today. Thank you all to everyone joining. My name is Eva Costas, and I'm with the capacity building team of the UniCCC. We'd like to warmly welcome you all to Becoming Changemakers of the Just Energy Transition session. For those of you that are new here, this session is a part of a series that we're running that's called the Becoming series, and it essentially came about to show the different roles that youth can take as change makers in climate action, because youth are and can become climate negotiators, storytellers, educators, innovators, and many different things. So from the session today, we're actually joined by the wonderful Dr. BinBin Jiang Pearce of the Delft University, who essentially will hopefully be building all of you guys' capacities to learn how to become change makers in the energy transition, but then also hope you gain as well the design thinking skills for systems transformation, not only on the energy sector, but beyond. And I think without further ado, then I will pass it over to you, BinBin, to start us off.
Thank you so much, Ava. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good. Okay, then I'll start sharing my slides. Do you see them, the slides now?
We can see them. Yes.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to this space. I'm very honored and so excited to speak to you all who are already motivated to do something and who represent really people who are ready to contribute to the bigger whole. And I hope that today I'll just be giving you a very small piece of my perspective of how I think you can do that even better. And just sharing with you some of my experiences and learnings over the years of what does it mean to try to be a change maker. So just to begin a little bit, I teach in a program called Conflict Systems Management Engineering. And I am an engineer by training, but why I'm doing what I'm doing now is because I realized that doing a lot of the environmental engineering stuff I was doing, that good ideas and good solutions are just not enough for creating true transformation. That in order for transformation to take place, we have to understand people, we have to understand their motivations, we have to also care for the types of behaviors that we do in the world. And technology itself is not enough to trigger that change. So what I want to do today is go into a little bit more detail about what that means. If technology and technology alone is not enough, what do we have to care about? What is the issue at stake that would allow us to actually see the change that we want to make in the world? So right now, this work that I'm presenting is in the sphere of the energy transition. But as the title indicates, I really want to talk about what being a change maker means also beyond the energy transition and looking at different types of problems that we have in society and talking about societal transformation in general. So to begin with, I want to understand a little bit more in the room of the type of problems that you are working with in the world. I just want to get a little bit more understanding of why are you here? What is the problem in the world that you want to do something about today that perhaps is motivating you to spend your precious time with us today? So if you could take a moment and use that QR code or the link and share with us a little bit about what is the problem in the world that you want to do something about today. So let's see if this works. I can put the, yeah. It's not really showing. Let me just click on it. Okay, this is not really working the way. Let me just stop sharing for a second and just go to the Mentimeter.
Are the responses coming in, BinBin? I'm able to submit them myself, so maybe
Okay,
just
I
take a
don't
moment for
really,
them to show up.
yeah, they're not showing up for me right now for some reason. Let me just check something. Okay, now it's working a bit.
If not, some of you as well, if you have any issue accessing the Menti, feel free to drop them on the chat. What problem in the world do you want to do something about today? Tell us.
So I'm not really able to see this for now. Oh, now it's coming in finally. So it's a little bit. So what I have is coming in. I can just report it verbally. Is, for example, just transition, the climate change, high electricity pricing, the energy crisis, etc. So a lot of you are talking about also some issues about poverty and unequal distribution of resources. So if you just hear me say these are some of the problems that have brought you here today, what might these problems have in common? And I would submit to you basically that all the things that you're mentioning, right? A lot of they're not small problems, first of all, they're pretty big problems. And they all have at its start up, they're broad and they're unclear to begin with. And so if you imagine these problems they're tangled in the beginning, and they also, none of them have a clear single solution. All the solutions to these particular problems also need to be adapted, they need to evolve over time. And so it's a bit of a mess, right? These are not simple simple problems. And the reason why these problems are not so clear is also that there are two aspects. One is, especially, for example, when we're talking about the just transition, we don't all agree on what we mean by what a just transition is. At the same time, we have a lot of uncertainty about what the problem actually is and what to do about the solution. And that's caused by the fact that we all have different lived experiences of what it means, for example, for the just transition to be just. So we have access to different types of knowledges. We have different types of education. We've lived through different life experiences. We come from different countries. There's different contexts in which we've grown up in. That leads to disagreement, right? That means that we have different views of what reality is. That's just how it is to live in a world where people are different. And on the other side, we have this issue about uncertainty. So if everybody was sure about what the problem is, we wouldn't disagree. But the problem is that we also lack knowledge about what to do about the situation at hand. So even though science has provided a lot of information about describing what the world is, maybe why some of the processes are the way they are, for example, with climate modeling and things like that, we still lack information and knowledge about how to do something. Once we know what is there, what is the right path to follow? There's not scientific evidence to tell us path A is better than path B because of the various contexts in which we're trying to implement these solutions, for example. And there's also this issue that there are unknown unknowns. This means that we don't actually even know, because the world is so complex, because the situations that we're in are so varied, we don't actually know what we don't know. So if this is the case, if there is conflict about what our perspectives are about what the problem actually is, and there's uncertainty, that means that we actually have not really decided on what the problem is. And therefore, we have very little chance to know how to respond to it. And all the problems that you've listed earlier on kind of fit into this particular way of understanding what a problem is. These are unstructured problems, which are also known as complex or wicked problems. There's just, it's not the same as, for example, how do we get from A to B in the most efficient time, for example, or the fastest time possible. These problems are more like, was the best way to get from A to B, where you don't even agree on what A is or what B is. So if these are the complex problems that we're trying to work with, which energy transition falls into, right? And which just transition and which high energy prices, all these issues relate to, then what are we actually able to do about complex problems? If we're just in a tangled mess all the time, then what is it that we actually are able to do? So also you can think about climate change in the same way. We have this huge challenge of, for example, meeting the net zero emissions in the next decades. What do we do? And I would like to say and offer to you that there are three main reactions that we see in society that what happens when we are confronted with these really complex problems where there's a lot of disagreement. The first reaction is a lot of times what I see in my students, for example, in the university. It's paralysis by analysis. It means that we actually learn so much about the system at hand that we understand all the interconnections, and that through that understanding, we actually don't know what to do anymore because there's too much information. The professor comes in and they tell us a lot of all these things, and all we know is that everything's interrelated, and if you change one thing, everything else changes, and there's knock-on effects. What are we going to do? So I see this reaction a lot. We're just paralyzed by how much we know, actually. So that's the first reaction. The second reaction is anger, right? That we know so much about all the wrong things that are happening in the world. People are not doing what they're supposed to do. What that immediate reaction we have is, okay, I'm going to be pretty angry, or you turn it, that's outward, or you turn it inward, where you become very anxious. This is where a lot of the issues of eco-anxiety comes in, or there's a move to protest, right? Or this well-intentioned but sometimes negative manifestation, which is to take down that which you disagree with, right? Instead of reconciliation and things like that, just knock it down. So that's a second recognizable reaction that we have to complex problems. There's just too much to deal with. The third reaction, which I actually think happens a lot in science and happens a lot in engineering, for example, my own field, is rejecting complexity. This means, look, we can't solve everything. Let's just break the world down into simpler problems. Let's forget the fact that people have emotions, for example. Let's forget the fact that people sometimes are irrational. Let's just assume all the time that people are rational and that people always follow rules. And if we can assume that, then we can solve the problems at hand. The problem with that is the solutions that you develop just don't work, right? Because you're just rejecting reality at that point. So this is what happens a lot when engineers design solutions that engineers think they should work, but they actually don't get taken up in the world. So that's a rejection of complexity. What I would like to offer is a fourth reaction for how we can take on complexity and these complex problems. And that is, instead of rejecting complexity, to confront it. And what does that mean? That this reaction is a fourth different type of mindset to take on. And this means to take small steps, to be flexible, and to accept the fact that not everything can be known already at the beginning, right? So this means that you still do something. You're not paralyzed. You are doing something, but at the same time that you're doing something, you're accepting that because of the things that you don't know, you're going to have to change, and you're going to have to change quickly. And you're going to have to accept the fact that you or other people might be wrong, but you still have to do things in the meantime and take on that feedback that's given to you in the world and keep on going. So this is a reaction, I think, that underlies the approach of the playbook that I'm going to spend time talking about the rest of the session that we have. And hopefully some of you have had a chance to sort of skim through it, or you know about this already, so that's why you're here. This is to give you a little bit of background of why this playbook was written the way it was, and the belief that underlies this particular playbook is what I just showed you. That small action, no matter how small they are, can lead to big transformation. And I mean, this is an easy sentence to say, but there's two aspects that I want to emphasize in order for this to be true, right? And that is a particular mindset to keep to put forward, and a particular methodology that we use to support that particular statement of small actions leading to big transformations. I feel like sometimes that we say that and it's just off the cuff and we just accept that as a default. It sounds good, but I want to really show how that statement is possible using this particular mindset that we have behind the playbook and using that particular methodology. So first, the mindset. This mindset, I like to call it humble efficacy. This is not written anywhere in the playbook, but I think after some time that we developed the playbook, we really tried to name what is it that this mindset that I explained to you was. And I think this term maybe covers most of it. So what humble efficacy is about is that before you do anything, to take on 4 points. One is the willingness to start small. Sometimes I think, especially I know this is the case when I was in university, I want to do something with impact. I want to do something big. I want to change the world. And that comes from such a good place and it comes from good intention. But that doesn't happen unless we're willing to start small and concretely, because that is where we start to value what we know, what our talents are, and what our experiences are. So being willing to start small also comes with value starting from where you are today. And also involves being patient, meaning a lot of times when we want to have impact, we want to do A and we want it to lead to B immediately, right? And when we when we don't see A going to B immediately, we think we're either doing the wrong thing, we get discouraged, or we get frustrated. But a big part of this mindset of humble efficacy is expecting that things take a long time to change, and that just one action may not be enough, and that we're kind of adding drops of water into a huge container, or one grain of sand into a huge pile, right? That what requires us, this requires us to wait and to see what happens. And also, finally, humble efficacy is about the efficacy part, right? The being willing to start small, the valuing where you are, and being patient. Those are all aspects of the humility that I'm talking about. But the last piece, the efficacy part, is believing that your actions contribute to a greater whole. And nobody except for yourself can actually have this belief. Nobody, you have to choose this belief, right? I can't prove to you that this last statement is true. You have to take it on faith. And that's what efficacy is. There's a study in psychology, for example, they compare groups of people who are able to live fulfilling lives, or they choose to contribute to volunteerism and things like that. And the biggest difference between people who do act and who don't act are people with this idea who have a sense of self-efficacy versus those who don't. And all self-efficacy is, or collective efficacy, is that belief that by doing something, it matters. And that by doing something, it matters even if you can't see it, you believe it. And that your actions, and for us, this means that your actions contribute to a greater whole. And so I have to say, if this is a choice of whether or not you believe this or not. And some of us have lived lives that enable us to believe this easier than others. And it's just a matter of being open to this possibility, open to this statement. But it's definitely a choice whether or not you take on this last point. So that's the mindset of what the playbook is about, humble efficacy. And then there's the methodology. And the methodology is not new. It's design thinking has been around for decades. But what's new is how we're applying design thinking. And we're applying design thinking on a systems level for systems transformation. It's also the purpose of design thinking. In the past, design thinking has really been used for businesses, for example, to produce better products, for making better services. But we're really adapting design thinking for systems transformation. And it consists of 5 steps that you see here. Of empathizing. You start with empathy. Then you use your observations that come from your empathy to define the problem, and to be creative about defining what the problem actually is. You use those problems to start brainstorming, to come up with solutions. You test the solutions, and you prototype and test those solutions, and you start back over again with the results of those tests to see if you can deepen your understanding about what the situation actually is. And it's an iterative process. That's why it's an infinite loop that we represented here. But the underlying idea of the methodology, and this is something that I think there's resistance to it because a lot of us who want to make change, I think we're eager to get to the solution. But the backbone belief also of this methodology is that getting the problem right is more important than getting the solution right. And the idea is that if we don't spend enough time really pinning down what the problem is from a specific point of view, even if we have the best solution, the solution is to the wrong problem, then we've wasted our time and resources, right? So it behooves us to actually think more carefully about what the problem actually is, from whose perspective, and why is it that we've defined the problem the way it is. And this is a step that's oftentimes skipped over in lots of meetings that I'm in lots of real world projects for municipalities, for example. Every time we have a meeting, the conversation starts with what should we do? And it doesn't start with what is actually the problem behind what we're doing, and how is it that we have different beliefs about what's happening. And we never get to the next level of understanding, which is how is it that you see the world? How is it that I see the world? And how do these different understandings of the world lead to our perception of what the actual problem is? And how do we actually argue about that? Versus most of the time that's hidden away by our debates about what the solution should be, right? So this methodology really tries to uncover what the problem is to begin with. So hopefully with some of the examples that we have coming up later on, you'll see how we will make the problem more clear. So today, I mentioned that there's 5 steps in the design thinking for systems transformation, but we'll just be focusing in on one of the stages and 1.5 of the stages, 2 at most, which is the first 2 and most important steps of design thinking. That's the empathizing bit and the defining bit. How do we actually get to the problem? And hopefully you'll be able to get a better feel for how we do that in the playbook at the end of the session. So first of all, let's go to the first step. And the first step of design thinking is empathizing. So the idea is that before we can actually know what the problem is, we have to know how different types of people experience the world and how they see the problems themselves. And also, we want to make use of our actual lived experiences in order to have a starting point for the problem. And the idea here is that this is one example of how we confront complexity versus avoid complexity. We realize that these complex problems, let's say the energy transition, and how do we get rid of energy poverty, for example, there's a million different places where you can start with how you can define that problem, right? And the idea of this methodology is start from what is closest to you. And the best chance that we have of solving one small aspect of the problem is making use of our own experiences and our own observations in order to address that issue, because we can't address everything. So let's just address the issues that are closest to us, for which we have a personal feel for. That's just the assumption behind this approach. So to do this, there's 2 activities, really. One is to identify the bugs, what we're calling bugs, that affect you and those close around you. And a bug this is an analogy taken from programming, or it's taken from really the engineering language, but a bug is something that is undesirable or harmful or is getting in the way, and it occurs regularly. So the first step of this design thinking is you step outside, for example, or you just take a moment to reflect, and you try to identify what is not working in the world around us. And if this is applied to one of the problems that you mentioned, for example, earlier, for example, high energy prices or just transition, I'm asking you here to identify a particular real manifestation of that problem in the world that you see in front of you that proves that that's a problem. So what are the bugs that you see around you? For example, how do you know that energy poverty is there? Why is it that you want to identify just transition as one of the problems that you want to work on? What is the bug? So that is the first step to empathizing. Just taking yourself out of your head and going into the world. And in the playbook, we have an exercise. We're doing this. We don't have time to do that today, but it's to go out and take pictures or to find concrete examples of what's happening in the world, which you think is not quite right. That's really getting your goat. That's really bothering you. And to find examples and concrete examples of this. I hope this time this works. We'll see. But I want to ask you, what is a bug that exemplifies the problem that you chose earlier? So, and please be as specific as you can. And perhaps you can choose a bug that affects you or those around you directly, right? So let's say maybe you chose the just transition or you chose high energy prices. How does that show up in your life? So just take a moment with the QR code.
I mean, just to flag, we still see the former question, the previous question on the mentee. This newer one might have to be launched, but then if not, people can just drop their responses on the chat.
Oh, okay. So it's not this question that's shown?
It's still the what problem in the world do you want to do something about today?
Oh,
I think if you click start mentee though, it should.
Okay.
We should all be able to. There we go.
Okay. I see this. I think there's a delay in, there we go. Oh, great. Great. So those are some of the responses that we have. Textile waste, congestion, policymakers needing to take young people seriously, clean cooking, no incentives to move sustainable energies, lack of waste management infrastructures in Africa, loss of species. Fantastic. Okay, so I think from this, these are exactly the types of bugs that I'm talking about. There's no road. So this one in particular, no roadmap for energy transition. This is really interesting. I would want to dig a little bit deeper into this because what is it that you see that is not existing, right? That would be really, really, that's exactly right. That's evidence. So what you see, this list is evidence for what's there or what's not there. That is inarguable. Like there is a lack of waste management infrastructures, right? Or there are no incentives. I mean, so each of these, as soon as you put these bugs in front of you, you can also question them, right? Because you can also see, is it really that there's no incentives or there's no incentives for certain types of sustainable energies? Or are you talking about there's not sufficient incentives? So once we get these bugs on the table, we can start to do more research. We can start to question one another. We can start to unveil what is an assumption, what is knowledge, and we can start to get more specific. But this is a great starting point. All right, great. So it's really clear that you know what bugs are. These are just some of the visual bugs that we were able to get from running the playbook with a group of students across the EU and Africa. And these are some of the responses from our African participants about what are bugs they see in the energy transition. And these are pictures, for example, the woman on the top is indoor smoke caused by the most accessible straw fuels that she's able to access, leading to health problems. It's also the total dependency on charcoal, which leads to deforestation. That's what the picture you see on the right. So these are examples of, it's just a snapshot of something that you don't really necessarily need to know what's going on behind this, but you know that's not right. Or something about this just doesn't sit well with you. Or this cannot be right, right? This is just sort of almost a trigger in you to do something. That's all a bug is. So this is, I'm just giving you an example of a bug in verbal form now. Maybe this is an observation. Based on those pictures, many households lack access to safe, affordable, time-efficient fuel for cooking and lighting for rural populations, right? That's just a very simple definition of what the bug is, and clearly you get it. So now the question is, okay, you have the bugs, and now the next step is to create an insight from these bugs. So we have the what. The issue is we want to dig a little bit deeper. So why do these bugs exist? How do they come about? How do they operate on the system that we want to change? And what it's, and who's being affected? So all these questions we need to include in the insight. And why do we need an insight? Often, so the insight allows us to explain why or how something happens. And oftentimes an insight is really important because it restructures the way we understand something. It's also usually the insight is very specific to a time, a place, and situation. So we start making the bug, which is something a bit generic sometimes, into a very specific time, place, and situation. And insights are based on observation and facts that can be traced back to a credible source. So it's no longer just a gut reaction to something that's wrong. We're starting to connect what these bugs are to actual sources so that we know where and how we come to that realization. And most importantly, an insight is an aha moment. It makes you aware of what your prior assumptions might have been and makes you see something in a new light. And so you see that the insight is the explanation, the background, the interesting things behind what the bug is. So one analogy you can see is the bug is maybe the symptom and the insight is the entire diagnosis. Or the bug is sort of the little bruise on the surface of the apple, and the insight is actually when you cut the apple open, you see the reason why the bruise was there, right? There's a little worm inside. So the insight is the worm in that case. So the insight really is digging really a lot deeper to explore what is really there. So for us to get, so I gave you a quick definition of what insights are. That's what this list is. But I want to sort of give you a pop quiz a little bit about whether or not you think these are insights and why or why not. So I'm just going to give you a second to sort of to read these sentences. And I want you to ask yourself, based on the definition I gave you here, so the insight explains why or how, it's connected to a specific time, place, it's based on, you know, credible sources, etc., and it gives you an aha moment. Are these insights? Why or why not? So the first sentence is the temperature has increased by an average of so many degrees every year on Fiji since the 1950s. Is that an insight? Second statement is climate change is the problem which everyone should make their top priority to solve. Is that an insight? And the third statement is climate change has negative consequences for the environment. So keep in mind, I'm not asking you if these are right or wrong statements. I'm asking you if these statements are insights. So feel free to, maybe in the chat, you can just respond to whether you think 1, 2, or 3 are insights or not. So is number 1, the first statement, is that an insight? Okay, we have 1 response. We have a yes, and we have a no. Okay, great. Any other responses? Just give it a moment. Make a decision if you, yes. Okay. So there's a little bit of, okay. There's a bit of dispute as to yes or no, with most people saying yes. Okay, so here's my response. No. This is not an insight in the sense that we're trying to develop it for this very specific methodology, because it's one piece of information. So this information is correct, but we don't understand why it's happening. So the temperature has increased every year since the 1950s. But why is that the case? And why are we talking about Fiji? So this is an individual piece of data that is true, but it remains unexplained. So therefore, it's not quite an insight. Okay? So now, what do we think about the second statement? Is the second statement an insight? Climate change is a problem which everyone should make their top priority to solve. What do you think here? We have a no, we have a yes. Yes. Okay. Well, I'm going to say no. And the reason why this is actually not an insight is because when we say climate change is a problem which everyone should make their top priority to solve, even though you may agree with it, it is an opinion, right? Because it's not true that it's not true that everyone is making climate change their top priorities to solve. And there is not, in this statement itself, there's not the evidence to support that climate change is the problem that everyone, no matter who you are, should make it their top priority to solve, right? So let's say a single mother who has to raise 2 children, you're saying that if you're agreeing with this particular statement, you're saying that yes, even her, she should make climate change her top priority over everything else, right? This is, even though this is true, might be true for most people, and you happen to agree with it, doesn't make it an insight, right? Because it's not, it's based on an assumption of what you think is true in the world, how you want to operate in the world, but it's not true for everybody. So you see how it's difficult to separate out what an insight is from what you happen to agree with? Okay, let's try again. Third statement, is this an insight? Climate change has negative consequences for the environment. Is this an insight? Okay, I have a lot of yeses. A couple of no's. Again, some, right? There's could be yes, could be no. Good. Any other? Anybody else want to try this there? Yes. Okay. Okay. All right. So I'm going to say no. It's not an insight again. Isn't this so frustrating? No, this is also not an insight because, again, we're not going to disagree. We're not saying that this is not true when I say this is not an insight. What I'm saying, though, is that doesn't fit our definition of an insight, which is that it's a generalization. So there's no specific time, place, people that you're explaining. It's just a generic statement. That does not make it an insight. And this is what makes this methodology quite challenging, is because we're trying to separate out generalizations, assumptions, and opinions as the starting point for solving questions versus true insights. And so if we go back, for example, to the first one, the first statement, that does have a specific time, date, and place, but it's still unexplained what the implications are. The fact that you have the specific time, place is not enough for it to be an insight. So, okay. I think I've frustrated you enough about what is or is not an insight. I'm just going to wrap this up here as a single takeaway, and then I'll work with some examples for you to know a little bit more what I mean by insight. An insight is an explanation of why a bug is there and or how it affects the system it's a part of, right? So it is not an opinion, it is not an assumption, it is not something that you agree with or not agree with. So an insight is not something that you happen to agree with. An insight is a true explanation of what's happening in the world. And we have to separate that from our own opinions. right? This is what is the message I'm going to try to go in on a little bit more. Okay. And the idea is that we start from a bug and we get to an insight. Like I told you, the bug is the little bruise and the insight is the bug inside the apple, right? And so there is a way and a methodology that is presented in the playbook, which helps guide you through how you get from the bug that you recognize. So for example, that one bug, no roadmap for the energy transition, right? How you get from that bug to the actual insight. Because I want to know, as a part of the insight, why is there no roadmap? What kind of roadmap is not there? What's the implications of it having no roadmap for the energy transition, right? So this whole methodology is trying to walk us from the bug, which is our starting point, to a full-blown insight. And I would, though, before I walk you through that methodology, to try it on your own, and I hope this works now, which is that what is the insight you have about your bug? So remember your bug, and then try to develop an insight related to the bug. This is super difficult. At this moment, what was exactly that wasn't.
BinBin, sorry to interrupt, you got muted. Could you please unmute yourself?
Can you hear me?
There we go. Yes, thank you.
Yes, yes. So I want you to just give it a try. What is your insight related to your bug, given all that we've discussed right now? So remember what your bug was, or you can choose a different bug, but what's your insight about the bug? Right? We had also a bug, for example, about the lack of waste infrastructure in Africa, for example. What's the insight about that bug? So that's an observation. There's no waste infrastructure. But why is there no infrastructure, and how is there no infrastructure? The same thing about the roadmap. Why is there no roadmap? I'll give you just a moment there. Like I mentioned, this is not easy, but just give it a try. By the way, if anybody has a question about this, we also, while we wait for the responses to come in, maybe you want to share, if in case you want to share your insight you're not sure about, you can also raise your hand, and then we can also see if we want to develop an insight together. I'm not sure why we're not able to see this again, so I'm going to read out, because I see it here on my slide. Let's see. I'll share my window where I can see it. So here are the insights. Bug is an opportunity to solve a matter. Okay, that's interesting. Another insight is the average Trinidadian loses 16 hours per week. Okay. The lack of a roadmap to energy transition creates barriers to achieving renewable energy goals as it impedes resource alignment, accountability, timely action. Okay. Yep. Okay. Bug happens when there are some problems, and knowing the problem is not solved. So as a teacher. Great. So we're getting there. I think, I think we're really moving forwards and understanding, and it takes a lot of time to sort of develop the bug. And you now know, hopefully, what I want you to feel and sense is how difficult it is to get from a bug to an insight. If you feel that, we've met our goal. The point is, the role that research and knowledge has is in bridging the step between the bug and the insight, and where you can bring in your experiences and knowledge, and is exactly in identifying the bridge between the bug and the insight. And here's another aspect that I want to say while we're looking at these insights is that, there's a bunch of bugs that we can work on in life, right? That there's so many. And one way of discerning which bug you should spend your time and energies on is probably the bug for which you have the insights for. Therefore, when you test yourself in being able to say, do I have an insight for this bug? If you have an insight for that bug, you're probably a good person and candidate to solve that bug. Do you see what I mean? And then when we realize how difficult it is to actually have an insight about the bug, we realize that not all problems are for us to solve. Which bugs are for me to solve? Those are the bugs in which I can actually develop an insight about, right? So I think that, for example, let me just take some of these examples here to develop a little bit more. And I'm just going to pick on this lack of roadmap as an insight, right? The lack of a roadmap to energy transition creates barriers. This is great because this is it's more developed, right? Because it's saying, what is the consequence of not having a roadmap? That's super. And then I would ask, but for which countries and which areas and which scales are you talking about that there's a lack of roadmap? Is it national? Is it a local community that we're talking about? And when you say lack, are you saying that there's actually no roadmap, or are you saying that the roadmap that's there is not being implemented? Which one are you talking about, right? So when we try to write out an insight, we become more and more clear about what it is that's actually bothering us. And that leads to more questions, that leads to more research that you can do, and that leads to you being able to really find the niche and the entry point to how to solve the problem. Okay, so I will just now go back to the presentation and move forward. Yeah, okay, I hope you see this now. Right, and I just want to give you an example of an insight that builds on the original bug I gave you as an example, right? So remember, the original bug was that many households lack access to efficient fuel, safe fuel for rural populations. So if I were to develop this into a further step, and this is not a perfect insight, this is just sort of the next step insight, but this is one step going forward. Women and girls bear the burden of fuel provision for their families following gender norms in many rural areas of Nigeria. They disproportionately suffer from respiratory diseases from cooking smoke and time and energy loss used to gather fuel sources, which otherwise could be used for education and other skills training. Okay, so what we see there is that I got there by moving through the different boxes of this particular exercise. I'll leave this for you to look at on your own, but these questions ask questions of the bug such that you can develop it into a bigger insight. And the insight then has who is being affected, specifically women and girls. It has a slight, explanation of why it's happening, gender norms in many rural areas of Nigeria. It also has an explanation of the needs that people really have in relation to this particular observation and this bug, which is that they have to not suffer from diseases. They want to have time and energy left over. And it also includes what are the values that are behind what we're trying to address. And that is getting everyone education and developing everyone's full potential, right? So you can see that by addressing some of the questions that we have in this chart right here, you just walk through the bug and you go from left to right. you can get to a more developed insight in which you can fully explore what is behind that bug. Yeah, so what we do after, that's the first step. So all of that is just the first step, which is the empathizing part. It's to try to get behind what is actually happening on the ground, how to discern between what I'm assuming as my opinion and what's actually happening in reality. And the second step is using all that information, my insight, and then actually writing out a problem statement that is my starting point for brainstorming what the solution might be. This involves identifying, more specifically, the exact people and actors, we call them, who are affected or can affect the insight. It's about identifying their needs and values more specifically and putting it all together in a statement. And at the end of the day, the statement has three components. It's the someone, what they need, and why they need it. And it just looks like this. The statement is just a linked up set of, it will kind of fill in the blank about what the problem actually is. What is the specific group of people? What is the need that they have? And how do you know that's their need, which is the insight that we've been talking about the whole time. I'll give you another example. You can just sort of digest this later on, I think, to see what the sequence is like. But this would be something that you end up with, right? Women and girls from various rural regions of Africa. Now we specify which regions, other regions, experience time poverty. This prevents them from meeting their full capacity as human beings. So it's just a interpretation of what the insight is in order for us to establish exactly what our starting point is for brainstorming. And the idea is that this initial problem statement is what you talk to lots of people about. You can start with your own version of the problem statement, but the whole point of this particular methodology is that it's collaborative, which means that, for example, you can take this statement to the women and girls who are actually being effective and ask them, is this true? Is my understanding of what your experience is actually what you're experiencing? And the point is that when you get a problem on paper, you can start to argue and debate what is actually the problem, and you can start to get different perspectives in on it. So the more perspectives that you get from defining the problem, the better. You can get feedback on that problem statements, and you can also get the people who will actually be affected by the problem. You can get them to actually be a part of the solution by asking them already at the beginning, hey, is this actually the problem, or is it my perception of your problem? And so much of the issues with foreign aid, with technology transfer, with a lot of the solutions from engineering technology that we see is the problem today, is that we assume what the problem is without actually verifying what the problem is, and especially verifying the problem for the people that we're supposedly trying to help. And through the use of these statements, we try to make that process more collaborative, more cooperative. All right, so that's all I'm going to go through today in terms of the first two stages of design thinking. From there on, you take these statements and you brainstorm, and you break down the problem statement, and you try to say, okay, so for that aspect of the problem statement, what solutions can we be? But you can, and through this thing of what we're calling the how might we questions, which is that you just break up the problem statement into smaller actionable pieces, and you just ask, how might we, for example, how might we actually try to give women and girls more time back? How do we reduce the amount of time that they need to collect fuel, for example? And then based on the ideas that you develop, you prototype. And the prototype is really the idea is that you do something very simple on paper with a drawing, very fast, dirty, quick. And the idea is that then you test those prototypes with the people that are being affected. And so you can quickly get an idea of, hey, is my understanding of the problem really correct? And then you start back from the beginning. Based on my prototype, oh, my understanding of the problem is actually not right at this and this part. It should be changed to this and this part. So it's a quick cycle of quickly changing your notion of what's actually happening, what's actually the best way to approach a particular problem. And you just kind of keep going in a loop. And the idea is that you're always learning, always iterating, and always learning from the people with which you're trying to develop the solutions with. And you're never just doing it separate from them. And that's the 5 stages of the design thinking methodology. And again, if you take away nothing else from the presentation, just remember that an assumption and one way of making change is to start small, start from where you are, be patient, and have the belief that your small part will matter. And that is, if you read the playbook with that perspective, I think you might be able to get what you need out of it. All right? So thanks so much for listening. I know that was really fast, but if you want to learn more about the playbook, there's a QR code for that. And if you want to learn more about energy citizenship, which is the topic from which a lot of this methodology got developed from, you can also learn more about the project that just got concluded called the ENCLUDE project. And you're very welcome to ask me any questions. Please feel free to reach out to me directly through email. And I look forward to also corresponding with you if that's the case. So I'll give the floor back to Eva if there's perhaps she has more to say.
I really, first of all, just wanted to thank you, BinBin, again, for taking the time to walk us through the methodology. My design thinking skills have definitely improved, and you've clearly showed us as well how it's such a multi-layered process, and really appreciate you breaking it down for us. And now we hope this has been the case for all of you joining as well, that your design thinking skills have been further developed. And now we just look forward to you as well. Please feel free on accessing the playbook and really going through it, because it really is such a valuable and useful resource for those of you that want to get into the energy sector, are interested, or are already a part of it as well. But then it also applies to other systems beyond the energy systems as well. So again, thank you so much for that, BinBin. For any of those of you as well that will be at the COP, we will actually, under the Youth4Capacity program, we will actually be doing a bit of a pop-up marketplace style session where the playbook will be showcased, but then also we'll have a bunch of other tools for youth. So if we were just to stop by and say hello, I know Chandel as well, I was seeing on the chat, will be there. So any of you are welcome over there. But with that, again, just thanking you immensely, BinBin, for sharing us with all your expertise. And thank you for everyone else as well that joined today. And we look forward to seeing you on any upcoming Becoming sessions under the Youth4Capacity program. Take care.
Thank you.